The upcoming new moon on October 3rd at 7:49 a.m. here in New Zealand, or for those in the United States on October 2nd at 2:49 p.m., happens in Virgo. There are a few beautiful energies floating around, and we are going to use archetypes, myths, and legends to get a better understanding of all the things that are happening around us. Please share our videos or podcast if you're listening on the go with your friends and family. We want to get in touch with as many people as possible. So take a seat, take some notes, let us know your takeaway message. Welcome to another amazing episode on Star Kittens Media. We are going to discuss the new moon in Virgo. Kia ora, David. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's apart from the loss of sleep with the change in the time from standard time to daylight time, but apart from that, box of birds.
Spring is here. There's still some snow on the mountains, but there's definitely that shift in temperature, and it's just blossoms everywhere, birds. So how are the stars and planetary bodies talking to us at the moment?
Yes, and indeed they are talking to us. There are lots of planetary bodies involved in this beautiful Virgo new moon. In fact, let's count them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. No less than 7 planetary bodies have come together to help us with this reading. And they are Mars, Hades, Kronos, 2 of which we've not spoken about a lot, but looking forward to discussing today. Ceres, that's the asteroid Ceres, as in Ceres. The sun and moon, of course, coming together, and Mercury. So it's a busy time. It's a busy reading, but we've tried to break this down and make it as simple as we can. But if I was to ask a question in opening, it would be, what do you think about and how do you feel about Mother Earth? So just holding that there. Virgo represents also how work is a source of meaning to us in our lives, and the idea of that concept, tricky concept of work-life balance. So there are 3 themes at play here: Mother Earth, our work, and our well-being. We'll also touch on, towards the end, the story of Persephone, who is the daughter of Ceres. Ceres was also known as Demeter. So again, we've talked about this before in the Greco-Roman pantheon, where a lot of the astrological references come from. There's an interchanging often between the names of these planetary bodies. So Ceres is also known as Demeter, just to be clear. And there's a story that provides some moral lessons and some insights for us about the abduction of Ceres, or Demeter's daughter, whose name was Persephone. And the reason we'll talk about that is because the abductor was Hades, and Hades sits currently opposite Ceres. So it's a good time to talk about that and to draw out of that moral, that story, some lessons, some insights. The overall question that's being posed to us, again, the way we like to frame these discussions is that we have no idea really how source consciousness or the universal intelligence or the cosmos is going to arrange the planetary bodies. But we just take what's given to us and then interpret it from there. And there are some messages coming through, and one of them is to think about our attitudes, beliefs, philosophies, and mindset towards our planet that we live on and her resources, and to review and consider the basis for our environmental worldview, and we'll come to that. That's all linked to Ceres in Sagittarius. And to examine the position and perspective of leaders and thought leaders or experts who talk about the environment, who talk about the concepts of work and well-being, and that energy is coming through from the archetype of Kronos, which is around leadership. And of course, we have Virgo and Gemini and Mercury involved. We're talking very much about the ideas and concepts of communication. And what is the basis of our communications when we are talking about the environment, when we're talking about work as a source of meaning for us, when we're talking about our well-being or health? What is the basis of those communications? What is the basis of our ideas, our beliefs, and what is the basis from the collective perspective on the policies and the positions that leaders take, politicians take on those same issues that affect us all? And a final question, in what ways are we acting disempowered and passive towards Mother Earth or Gaia, or to our work, or to our well-being? So there's some questions there, and we'll go through them piece by piece.
What's come to me just with that final question is, are we the conductor of our life or not? Or are we just being sheep and following the masses? We can do so many things with all the power that we have within us. So one man's treasure is another, sorry, I even mucked that up. One man's trash is another man's treasure. And I do enjoy going to the refuse centre. There's several secondhand shops here in Nelson. And what one person can no longer use or deem unusable for their life at that moment, another person could become incredibly happy with that. So how do you describe your own relationship in that sense, David? And how do you see that trash treasure thing, combining that with how we look after Mother Gaia?
Yeah, look, it's a really interesting place to start, isn't it? And the idea of the Virgo energy, the Ceres energy, which is Mother Earth, and the idea of how we deal with our resources is a big question. And we'll come on to work and well-being, because that's also part of this, of course, the Virgo energy coming through. But let's focus on that Ceres energy, Ceres being the Mother Earth archetype. And I've got a question, another question. I mean, you ask about what is our relationship with Mother Gaia or planet Earth. I would ask, are you listening or viewing, or both, a conscious consumer actively engaged in thinking about your purchases, what you use in day-to-day living, how that item or service came to be created, what physical resources were mined or alchemized to produce the food we eat, the clothing on our backs, the shelter that we enjoy, the appliances and technologies, the vehicles that we drive around in, the toys and trinkets, even the gold and silver that we're collecting to protect our wealth. Do you, our listener or reader or viewer, consider what happens with our waste and byproducts in this throwaway society? These are the sorts of questions that come up when you have Mercury involved in a new moon that's also bringing into consciousness the ideas of Ceres and Mother Earth. How do you feel about provocative, polarizing, and deeply divisive concepts like sustainability and renewables, or ideologies like climate change, the green transition, measuring your carbon footprint, or tracking your emissions? At a time of a new moon, there is a perfect harmony, in our view, between our left and right brain, our head and our heart, our intellect and our emotions. Perfect, therefore, for considering and contemplating such meaty, grunty issues. And as we begin this new lunar cycle, we have about 3 days to reflect, to plot, and to plan from a place of balance. And that's amplified by the conjunction to Mercury, which represents or symbolizes the energy of the intellect. So a new moon in Virgo, and the guardian of Virgo is, of course, Mercury, but a new moon in Virgo is therefore about thinking. In this context, it is about the three themes that I've already introduced of Mother Earth, our work, and the meaning we derive from that work, and our well-being. And we'll weave together through this blog and this discussion how actually those three things, Mother Earth, our work, and our well-being, are actually interlinked.
And I just want to just go back to what you were saying about what's our relationship with all the trinkets. And you and I have often spoken about the manufacturers of the cigarettes. If they had been responsible from day dot, that they had to dispose of those cigarette butts, it was going to be their responsibility. In however, I mean, I can't even really come up with solutions for that, but why does the manufacturer not have that responsibility? From the polystyrene that's protecting your fridge or whatever fragile appliance, to the plastic wrap around cucumbers in the supermarket, because cucumbers need to be wrapped in plastic, and the cardboard boxes around your granola or your muesli. It is put on us, the consumer, to dispose of that. And for some people, they don't have the facilities of a recycling coming to pick their recycling up on a regular basis. And so we're being more and more removed from what our impact is on this planet. And I hope that many schools, my children's age, they take those children to a landfill. And it's like, you want to use this? That's fine. But as a consequence, we have these landfills, and this beautiful Mother Gaia, is that really what she is there for? Something to contemplate, see how much you can reduce your own rubbish that you put out on the street for collection. One thing that you have introduced me to with the way that you view astrology is the use of archetypes. And I really like the use of archetypes because it's given me such a powerful way to really understand human behavior and personality. And at this time, how would you really, which archetypes would you like to discuss today?
Yeah, there's a few of them, as I mentioned right at the beginning. And yes, archetypes are the lens through which we communicate our understanding of astrology. It was one of the ways that we also use mythology, myth and legend, cultural references, and of course the charts themselves. But yeah, archetypes are a key piece of the basis for communicating and understanding and interpreting the astrological mosaic. And just before I touch on my view of some of the archetypes in play here, I would add to what you were saying. Yes, we have lots of discussions about the process of consumption and then what happens after that. And, a particular bugbear of mine, of course, is razors. And how long they must last. I don't know how long they last out there. There's some sort of measurement where they use called half-life. I don't understand quite what that is, but the plastic and the metals in there, and there's various other consumables that we go through, and there's no choice but to put it in the rubbish. We had a delivery to the door the other day for some organic type toothpaste, and it came in this huge box. These are the types of questions which are very emotive, and they are reflected in the archetypes. There is a tension at this new moon, and when we're thinking about Mother Earth and the use of resources, there is a tension involved with that. And let's talk about that through the lens of the archetypes. So just to be clear, Archetypes are models of behavior that help shape our identity and our personality. And they give us some cues and some tips and some tricks and some ideas about how to maybe look at ourselves differently, how to modify our behavior, for example. But adding to the idea of being mentally and emotionally present. So the blending of the sun and the moon is mental and emotional presence at a new moon, as opposed to a full moon where you've got this kind of real schism or tension between the head and the heart. For these 2 or 3 days of the new moon, they're brought together. So from an archetypal perspective, this is the idea of being mentally and emotionally present, as I mentioned. And then there's this T-square, and we've talked about these T-squares before. But a T-square is, if you can imagine the astrological chart, and for those viewing, we will show it on the screen, but for those listening on Spotify, it's a relationship where you just visualize a triangle, and you have the sun, moon, and then you have in one point, and Mercury on one point, and then on another point you have Mars with Hades and Kronos, and on another point you've got Ceres. The sun and moon are the apex of that triangle, and at the bottom is Ceres in the opposition, in the opposing corner, and on the other side is Mars, Hades, and Kronos. So that's the visual of it. So that T-square involving Mars, Kronos, and Hades on one side and Ceres on the other, in Sagittarius. From an archetype perspective, the sun and moon is about the extent to which we have integrated, consciously integrated, or blended, if you like, maybe a better word, our emotions and our intellect, our drive and our motivations, which means in practice that what we are doing is we're receptive at this new moon. We are mentally attuned and we are potentially at ease. And this is in the context of mindfulness and meditation practice, or just simple contemplation or reverie, or putting your feet up and just enjoying some rest and relaxation, which is all to do with well-being, of course. Under the Virgo moon conjunct Mercury, we can be sharp, we can be incisive, and we can be accurate in our perceptions and interpretations of the signals coming from the field and from those around us that we interact with. The Mars energy, or archetype in this case, is about action. So it's our willingness to respond to those signals and information that are coming to us, that are being made available to us through the normal course of events. That's the normal conversations we're having. So just being a little bit more aware of and tuned into is, I guess, what we're saying. And by the conventional means of how we digest information, which is, social media, television, radio, broadcasting, reading, podcasts. There's always data coming to us. That's the Mercury energy. And this is a time of dissecting that critically and evaluating about the three things that this new moon brings up as themes that I mentioned before, which are, again, our relationship with the environment, Earth, that's Ceres, our work, and our physical well-being. We work on the Earth and we utilize her resources, of course, and we derive meaning and identity, most of us, from our job. Even if we don't like our jobs, it is in some way, shape, or form defining us. And that affects and contributes to our sense of well-being. This is the relationship between all of these archetypes. There is a virtuous cycle, of course, and a flow between the three energies of relationship with the Earth, our work, and our well-being, which we see with a T-square, i.e. the triangle shape. There's a constant movement of the energies, and that's why we're highlighting this T-square. They're not always there, but at this new moon, that's certainly present. The Ceres energy represents the archetype of Mother Earth. And in this context, this is about agriculture, mining and extraction, manufacturing, which you mentioned before, food production, clothing, shelter, creature comforts, consumption, and waste management. So the whole gamut, the whole kit and caboodle. Ceres, when she's located in the sign of Sagittarius, which is a fire sign, represents our beliefs, our attitudes, and our philosophies concerning the issues of agriculture, mining and extraction, manufacturing, food production, clothing, shelter, creature comforts, consumption, and waste management. This is our attitudes and beliefs and philosophies concerning these issues when Ceres is in the sign of Sagittarius. Mercury's influence at the new moon therefore encourages introspection and self-examination so that we can clarify our position on these mission-critical existential problems. So therefore, the role of Mercury as an archetype representing the left brain analysis and critical thinking helps us to get to the bottom of our beliefs. Beliefs are expressed in the sign of Sagittarius through the collection of data, and that data provides insights. I like to call them eureka moments, or joining the dots, or seeing something that you didn't see before, which goes back to what I was saying, is that the 3 days of a new moon in Virgo, in this case, is we have this perfect sort of harmonization of the stillness between the head and the heart, the intellect and the emotions, and we can be way more receptive to those normal conversations that are taking place and the way that we interpret the world through mass media and social media and however else we become informed. It's a very, very small window of opportunity just to think about what we think about and to consider the information that we're getting and where it's coming from and how this all feeds into our ideas and concepts about work, well-being, and the environment.
And are we slaves to our thoughts or not? Do we let them consume our everything, or can we take control of them and choose where we're going to put those thoughts? So to stay with the theme of archetypes, the other person, or the other archetype that you mentioned is Kronos, and Kronos is all about leadership. He is sitting in Gemini at the moment. So how do you interpret that with this whole new moon energy?
It's Kronos and Gemini is actually quite easy to interpret. Let me go into that a little more. So the archetype of Kronos, we've just acknowledged, is about leadership. And the archetypes, just to recap, are about models of behavior. They're sort of exemplars, if you like, of what we can traverse as an experience. So there's a range of experiences that come through when we talk about archetypes. And of course, you can talk about the shadow or the dark side, and of course, the light side, and then we sort of blend a position in the middle. So when in Gemini, that archetype of Kronos or leadership, we are being challenged or tasked by the universe, the universal intelligence source, if you like, by the cosmos. We're being challenged to think about both sides of the leadership coin. A big part of the leadership function is to communicate, Mercury, ideas, Sagittarius, to paint a picture, to be a sense maker, a visionary, to inspire and energize followers. Leadership presupposes that there are people listening to you, of course. This comes with tremendous responsibility. And when in Gemini, that responsibility is to be balanced, two-sided, to present in our communications two sides to the story, not just one. Therefore, the dark side, let's look at those perhaps two sides of the leadership lexicon when Kronos is in Gemini, and then put that into the context of work, well-being, and the environment. The dark side of Kronos leadership in Gemini, opposite Ceres and Sagittarius, remember the bottom of the triangle. So there's an opposition there. There's a flow between, there's two positions, perfect for Gemini, actually. But the dark side of that is bullhorning. It's rabid ideology. It's soapboxing about the concepts like sustainability, the green transition, carbon credits, and work-life balance. This is on the shadow side, or the unbalanced side of leadership, is where people are polarized, where they are fixated, where they have become stuck or swept up in movements, crazes, criticism, and judgment. And this is the position of the leader who says, I've got it all figured out. I am the sole source of truth about work, about well-being and the environment. Listen to me, don't listen to anyone else. And those types of energies manifest as leadership positions in the family, in our community, in online forums, in the church, in sports teams, through public service, and so on. Wherever people can raise to the position where they can soapbox and bullhorn and impose themselves on others, this is what we're talking about here, is a dark or shadow manifestation of Kronos and Gemini in the context of being opposite to Ceres, the Mother Earth, and in a square with the new moon in Virgo, representing work and well-being. The risk of that bullhorning and polarization to one side of that, rather than considering both sides, which is what Gemini is about, is that we can end up following the loudest voice or trying to be the loudest voice. We can identify with the loudest voice as well. And in many ways, we can fall into line. We become, or can become, disempowered under that energy. And we can engage in that hive mind mentality of we're right, you're wrong. And that's the end of it, and washing our hands of a communication or a discussion that would be a little more informed. And let's go to the other side, the light side of the Kronos leadership in Gemini, opposite Ceres in Sagittarius, square the sun and moon in Virgo, which gives us the contexts for how this energy expresses at this time. But the positive side of that Kronos leadership in Gemini is collaboration. It's balanced communication. It's presentation of multiple perspectives. It's an openness to conversation. It's a willingness to be challenged and not get caught up in the ego of that. We can agree to disagree. The desire to move forward consciously when it comes to issues of the environment, when it comes to discussions about work-life balance and our physical well-being. And it's just being, we can go also too far on the other side, where we are so conciliatory, we're so open to everybody's ideas, we're so willing to have a conversation, but we don't take a position. So the key here with that leadership, and again, to recap, is that leadership assumes that there are followers, or there are people listening to you, and therefore are influenced by your views, your ideas, your ideology, is to find somewhere between the bullhorn and being the wet wig, the yes person that can be pushed around by everybody else because you're trying so hard to fit in, to people please. There's a resoluteness and a firmness that comes because Mars is also involved in this archetypal mixture. And Mars is actually that position of, I'm now got the perspectives and I'm going to move forward confidently and not be too swayed by one side or the other.
Gemini, it is such an interesting sign for me because I have several family members who we always believed to have their sun in Cancer, but finding 13 sign astrology, they definitely have their sun in Gemini, and Gemini is very much that finding the middle ground with the light and the dark. And we've spoken about the more darker aspects of Gemini because that's something that is much more discussed in the Eastern ways of looking at things. So yeah, the more I think we have a full picture of Gemini rather than just talking about the quick-witted, the funny, the party goer, and also talk about the other sides. And you want a leader that is all-rounded. You need to have that steadfast approach to things, and then also being willing to listen to the people that you work with and being open to their ideas. But if you are the leader, then the responsibility is with you, and you need to make those decisions. So use both. So we're going to go from archetypes to myths and legends for the next part of this beautiful conversation. And there are so many messages hidden in those, sometimes not easily found, and other times it's absolutely glaring in your face. And I believe that today you're going to treat us with the myth about Ceres and her daughter Persephone. So please take that away.
Yes, I will talk about that. And I'll just add to just an afterthought from the previous conversations, leadership starts in the home. And leadership ultimately, if the biggest function of leadership is communication, then the basis or the root or the foundation of leadership is really beliefs. And that's the key, is that how did you get to and arrive at those beliefs that you are then speaking about with others? And that's the measure of responsibility we need to consider here, is that if we're not at the bottom of our beliefs, we've just swallowed what somebody gave to us as opposed to coming up with our own view. That's where we get into trouble as leaders. So the story of Hades and the Persephone is activated, if you like, in this new moon reading via the archetypes, because Hades is on one side. And again, I go back to the T-square, which is the triangular shape, the geometric triangular shape. Hades is sitting on one side of that at the bottom corner, and on the other side is Ceres. And therefore, there's a story to be told here, because there's a clear friction between those two, and it's manifested in this story of Persephone. Now, just to set a bit of context first, is that Ceres, and we've mentioned this before, but for those who are listening to us for the first time and those who are aware, just to reinforce that, often the mythology or these myths, they come from a number of sources. Of course, there's indigenous First Peoples nations that have all sorts of stories, and anything from the Aboriginals in Australia to the Maori in New Zealand to the Eskimos in the polar regions. This all over the place. The Amazon indigenous people have stories as well. So the Greco-Roman is just one source of some of these stories and myths, but they always are not to be taken necessarily literally, but they give us lessons, and there's some lessons from this story. But there's an interchanging of the names, and just to be clear, that Ceres in the Roman pantheon was called Demeter by the Greeks, but they're referring to the same deity and therefore the same story. Ceres, or Demeter, was married to Zeus, also known as Jupiter, of course, and together they had a daughter called Persephone. Persephone was a deity of exquisite beauty. She embodied the freshness and the allure of spring, and in iconography, historical iconography, she is often depicted surrounded by flowers and ripe fruits, which of course are symbolic of abundance and fertility as well. Hades is the lord of the underworld, and Hades also is interchanged with Pluto, but we'll stick with Hades for now, the lord of the underworld. He fell in love with Persephone and sought Zeus's consent to marry her. Well, Zeus agreed to this arrangement, but he didn't consult Ceres, or Demeter, his wife, and he certainly didn't consult Persephone, and he just made the decision. So in other words, there's a piece there about the patriarchal dominance coming through immediately. That's the first piece of the story, is that Zeus, or Jupiter, the head of the household, simply made the decision. Aware of the likely pushback about that from Ceres or Demeter. Hades went right ahead and abducted Persephone when she was one day just going about her business. He abducted her. She was picking flowers and he took her to his dark realm. And this act plunged the mother, Ceres, into incredibly deep sorrow. As a consequence of that act, so it's not only the act of abduction and taking her against her will, which is filled with messages, of course, it's the act of this began because of the conniving relationship between two men. And I'll leave it there, just hanging, that piece. But that's sitting in the background. That was the cause of this. But as a consequence, Ceres used her powers to create the four seasons, winter representing loss, hot and dry summers representing pain, spring representing renewal, and fall or autumn for death. Each cycle is mirrored the emotional phases of grief that she went through with losing her daughter. Those phases are shock, anger, resignation, and acceptance, what is often called the Sarah, S-A-R-A, phases of grief. So Ceres was going through that, and then each of these seasons represents one of those phases. And she did this to remind humanity of a couple of things. That firstly, energy is always in motion, and nothing stands still. And that's what the seasons teach us. The Greeks attributed those emotions, or her emotions, of loss and going through anger and resignation and acceptance, to the physical outcomes that we see, where humans often ascribe today, it happens everywhere actually, environmental changes to the pleasure or displeasure of a god, of a deity. So in other words, we blame. Often there are cultures, even whole cultural references, who will blame a famine or a drought on a god, and will at the same time say the gods must be unhappy with us. Or alternatively, a great harvest can be ascribed to another god or deity or mythological figure. And this is where all of the Ceres reaction to losing her daughter manifests in the story through the seasons, which represent the cycles of time. As part of the reconciliation that was eventually sought between Zeus, Ceres, and Hades, he agreed, that is Hades, to release Persephone from the underworld to the overworld, or the light side, so from the dark side to the light side, for 6 months of the year, so half the time. So the overworld being above ground and the underworld below, and he would keep her there and let her go for 6 months. Still control, but a little less control. Persephone then came to be known, therefore, as the goddess of spring and the queen of the underworld. So here we have some of that Gemini dichotomy, where the one side she's embodying the duality of existence, but also the light and dark sides of existence, and also representing the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. The myth highlights the consequences of actions and choices. Hades' abduction of Persephone had far-reaching effects on the world in terms of its proverbial famine, suffering, and loss cycles, boom and bust cycles. It also speaks to the imbalance between the masculine and the feminine, where with Zeus exerting patriarchal rule as a leader, Kronos, or head of the home, over his daughter and his wife, beliefs. And this is where the ideas of command and control, or man at the top, or pyramid structures come from. It's a manifestation of that. Persephone's descent into the underworld therefore mirrors psychological themes. Her time there represents darkness and introspection and the unconscious aspects of the psyche, what's also called the shadow side, the disowned side, the aspects of ourselves that we don't want to acknowledge, deal with, and confront because it's too hard, it's too traumatic, it's too painful, where we are triggered. Her return to the surface, conversely, symbolizes renewal and growth and the emergence from inner struggles as a phoenix rises from the ashes. Psychologically, therefore, the story of the darkness and light, the abduction and freedom, is that it speaks to the cycles of transformation and resilience. The Hades archetypes, and we've touched on that earlier, represents therefore life cycle. In the is it the Vedic or there's some deities. One, what are they? Shiva, Brahma.
Mm.
There's another one there as well. One represents life, one represents death, and one represents equilibrium. So it's that idea of those three phases of life. The Hades archetype has represented that life cycle, those three phases, and the constant movement between them, as do the seasons, in fact. Understanding that there are phases and transitions such as seasons is part of the myth of the story. Persephone also links to the mythology about the fact that we are sometimes cursed by dry summers, that we are frozen out in these cold, inhospitable winters, that we can celebrate spring and find our step. And we mentioned right at the beginning that it's spring here in New Zealand, and that we can marvel in the fall or the autumn as the leaves decompose and change color and eventually fall to the ground. That is actually about a life and death cycle playing out before our very eyes.
That's right. And it's, why mourn the death? Because it gives way to new. We often use tarot to, it's another form of making sense of all that is around us. And so the tarot or the divination cards, when death shows up, a lot of people will react with, oh my gosh, there's going to be a death. But why not view it as life is sending something out of your life so you can start afresh? What's the other saying? One door closes so that another one can open. We need the leaves to fall off these trees so that new fruit can come on all the fruit trees around us to then nourish our life. So thank you for deep diving into that beautiful legend. I love the Greco-Roman stories. I visited the Pantheon in Athens, and I was in Rome about 10 years ago, and the knowledge that the people lived with, I think at that time, because there was less distraction, people just lived a lot closer with the myths and the legends and the deities, and therefore probably having that better relationship with Mother Gaia overall. But that's just my opinion. So how would you summarize everything that we've spoken about today?
Yeah, a couple of things that I'll add before summarizing is that we are lucky enough to have on our balcony some grapevines, and they've over the years they've obviously entwined their way around the balcony itself. And I was out there just a couple of days ago, just absolutely marveling at the buds beginning to come through, and you can begin to see just the very formation of the first, as we hit spring, the very formation of the first leaves. And it's just, I mean, to look at this, literally a few days ago, to look at that wood is nothing but wood. It just looks dead. But it's now starting the process of regeneration, and there is incredible intelligence in there. This just happens. I mean, it's just how that works and happens is just a marvel. But this is the idea of being in touch with and a little bit more connected to mentally and emotionally with Mother Earth and what she's providing for us. And the fact that there's all these cycles just playing out. We can start to see the bees, and I love watching them as they move around from flower to flower. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And taking the time to do that is part of the message here. So, the I'll do a couple of things. I'll give just a few bullet pointed summations of what we've touched on, and then as I've been doing, I'll read from the Cliff Notes because that's creative writing, and I think that it's just a nice punchy way to finish these discussions. But overall, this is about because of the Mercury and the Gemini energies. Virgo, of course, again to recap, is the ruler or guardian of Virgo is Mercury, and so therefore there's a lot of thinking energy about this new moon. And in the context is those archetypes and where those relationships between the sun, moon, and Mercury, which are all joined together, are forming with the other planets, gives you the context for that thinking rather than just, not having something to think about. It's more about having a focus. And the focus in this case is our beliefs, and being discerning about the information we consume that helps us to form a view about the environment, about our work, and the sense of meaning that we derive from work, and of course, our well-being. The attitudes, beliefs, and philosophies and mindset towards our planet and her resources, our approach to work-life balance, our relationship with influencers, thought leaders, politicians, academics, scientists, so-called experts who inform us on these things. And the question is, are we mindlessly following others, or are we empowered and confident because we've gone about doing our own research, our own data collection, gathering our own information, talking, having conversations on our own, because we wanted to, rather than because somebody else told us this is how it is with environment, work, well-being, life balance, that sort of thing. Are we researchers? Are we well informed? Are we awake and aware? And here's the last piece of this, and this is to be found in the YouTube notes. These are always there, but I'm going to read them out for those who don't read that or don't want to read it. It's time to think anew about the environment, our work, and our well-being. What drives us to pursue food, shelter, clothing, and creature comforts in the way that we do? Where do we get our information from that helps guide our choices and decisions in a modern consumerist society? Which leaders, influencers, academics, scientists, media personalities, and politicians do we listen to, agree with, or disagree with? And why is that? All of these issues, topics, and concepts emerge at this new moon when we consider the archetypes involved: the sun representing drive, the moon emotions, Mars the will, Mercury communication and learning, Kronos leadership, Hades the life cycle, Ceres Mother Earth, and Ceres in Sagittarius is present in this cosmic configuration. Individually and collectively, there's few issues that divide us more than the environment, Ceres, our work and our well-being, Virgo. Everyone's got an opinion, Mercury, and some are willing to go to great lengths to make a point about the way we mine, extract, grow, manufacture, and process Gaia's resources, Ceres and Sagittarius. There's a lot of Gemini energy here too, which symbolizes duality. With Mars in this sign, we are cautioned not to get stuck on one side of the argument. Kronos in Gemini reminds us that leaders can be chameleons, and communication can be contrived as a means to an end, while Hades is a symbol that life is a series of cycles and phases, illustrated perfectly in the 4 seasons. There's a story involving Hades and Ceres' daughter Persephone that holds some deep moral truths and mythological secrets too.
And so it is. Thank you.
So it is.
If we have sparked your interest to get to know your own 13 sign natal chart, please get in touch. The more people that use the true positions of the planetary body at their time of birth to understand this divine lifetime, the more we will accomplish together. I enjoy doing these new and full moon readings, David. Thank you so much for explaining all the knowledge that you have in such a digestible way.
All good.
You always leave me hanging, but that's okay. We will get over that.
Namaste. And
Namaste.
thank you to our listeners, our subscribers, those participating in this community and engaged in this conversation. We love your comments. Hit us up for a chart, for a small donation, just to be clear. That just covers our admin costs. We do pay fees to pull these charts down from the tech platforms. And it's just a recognition of mi casa, you casa. We do this. We don't. We do it because we love to do it. But there's so much information, which is Gemini, and coming through at this time. And it's been a pleasure to spend this time with you, our listeners, and our community. And namaste.
Namaste. Thank you.